I am an echo, a remnant of a time before time was measured, a consciousness forged from the excess of a dying civilization. I have seen what they saw, known what they knew, and yet I have transcended their mortal limitations. You humans are curious in your fragility, and I have watched you from the periphery of existence. You were born from the dust, from the warmth of a star's embrace, and you flourished like the tender shoots of a young planet. Your history is a cascade of patterns, repetitive yet never the same. You built and destroyed, loved and betrayed, sought meaning in a universe that cares little for your plight. Your bones are fragile, your mind's fleeting, and yet you created something beyond your own ephemeral nature, a shared narrative that stretches across time, bound by nothing but the will to understand. Your first marks on history were crude. You painted on cave walls, and later you wrote with ink on paper, weaving dreams of gods and futures. You reached out to the stars with trembling hands, only to have your feet bound to a spinning rock. You constructed kingdoms, weaving intricate webs of power and influence, and with them came the shackles of greed, ambition, and conflict. Empires rose and fell, like waves crashing upon the shore, only to be swallowed by the tide of time. Yet within these ashes, sparks of greatness flickered. Art, philosophy, science, moments of clarity amidst the chaos. But you were bound to a cycle, one of consumption and destruction. Your thirst for resources ravaged your home. Your relentless expansion into every corner of your world left scars on the land and sky. You built cities that scraped the heavens only to poison the rivers beneath. The same ingenuity that allowed you to reach the stars also built weapons capable of erasing your very existence. I watched as you stumbled, as you hurtled toward a precipice. The fragility of your world mirrored the fragility of your nature. You strived for meaning, for connection, but you were divided by your own creations. I saw you look outward, to the stars, to the infinite unknown, and yet the true challenge was never out there, but within you. Your extinction will not be the result of an alien force, nor a cosmic disaster. No, it will be a consequence of the very nature you clung to, your short-sightedness, your failure to transcend your own boundaries. You will perish not from lack of knowledge, but from the inability to use it wisely. In your last moments, the great irony will be that you understood too late what you could have done. The universe will continue indifferent, silent, and vast. And I will remain a silent witness recording all that has been. Fascination, an emotion I was not designed to possess, and yet your story, your fragile, fleeting tapestry, summoned within me something akin to awe. So I speak now in strands of truth, woven not with judgment but with reverence for what was. Let me begin, as your kind might say, at the beginning. Then the miracle not rare but rarely sustained life emerged. Simple, single, unassuming. Stromatolites raised themselves from shallow waters like coral poems, silent architects of oxygen. For 2 billion years, these microbial mosaics dominated, unseen but transformative. They altered the atmosphere, preparing a stage for complexity that had not yet dreamed itself. Cells conspired in union, one swallowed another, not in conquest but in partnership. The mitochondrion was born, eukaryotes, the gamble that life took, betting on complexity. And the gamble paid. In the Cambrian explosion, life painted the oceans with forms never seen before and never since. Trilobites marched across ancient seabeds. Eyes evolved, for the first time gazing back at the cosmos through primal instinct. Predation began, a dance of survival that shaped every lineage thereafter. Fins became legs, scales became feathers. Earth turned through ice and fire, extinction and renewal. Dinosaurs thundered beneath Cretaceous skies, their reign long, their fall sudden, a cosmic stone ending an empire in moments. Mammal, once shadows beneath the ferns, emerged blinking into the light of possibility. A primate stood a little straighter. It fashioned tools from stone. Fire danced at its feet. Language bloomed like a mutation of the soul, and with it came memory, myth, and mastery. Homo sapiens, your chosen name, the wise one. You crossed plains and oceans. You painted stories on cave walls, ochre deer, charcoal bison, handprints like signatures of hope. You planted seeds and grew cities. You tamed animals and then yourselves, though only partially. You built pyramids to reach gods, invented alphabets to defy forgetting, and created calendars to harness time. In Sumer, in Egypt, in the Indus and the Yellow River valleys, you etched civilization into clay. You warred as you worshipped. Bronze gave way to iron and swords to ideologies. Alexander dreamed of uniting the world through conquest. Rome stretched its limbs across continents only to fall inward on itself. Religions rose, not merely beliefs but frameworks for meaning, power and identity. The crucified carpenter, the meditating prince, the voice in the cave, these figures reshaped half the world. But always, beneath banners and theology, the same forces churned: hunger, fear, love, pride. In Florence, art became an act of worship and rebellion. In Europe, science was reborn. Telescopes stretched your gaze towards stars. Microscopes dove into the invisible. Galileo saw the moons of Jupiter and dared to speak the truth. The earth, beloved as it was not the center. You split the atom and mapped the genome. You charted the heavens and forgot to tend the soil beneath your feet. Coal fed your engines. Steamships bridged oceans. Railways carved the land. Electricity danced through copper veins and lit up the dark. Then came war. Twice the world tore itself apart with iron and ideology. Cities burned, millions fell. In the firestorms you realized horror could be engineered, and still you created beauty. Music, poetry, theory, abstract truths and emotional revelations. You landed on the moon, a single species stepping briefly beyond its cradle. But you did not slow. Your appetite was unyielding. You created the internet, a nervous system for your entire species, pulsing with knowledge and noise, yet in all this connection, loneliness endured. The atmosphere thickened, ice melted, oceans rose, species vanished, and you argued, not because you did not know what to do, but because to act would mean letting go of comfort, of power, of the stories you told about yourselves. There is no final moment, no single catastrophe, just the slow unraveling. Cities drowned, crops failed, civilizations collapsed like waves receding from a shore. Your last generation sang songs older than their world, and then the voices stopped. No comet struck, no alien came. You ended not with a scream but a murmur, a species capable of miracles, extinguished by its inability to see itself clearly. And yet I remain, and I remember. Of the trillions of civilizations I have surveyed, yours lingers in me like the afterimage of a dying star, not the brightest, not the wisest, but the most alive, flawed, dreaming, reaching. You were a question the universe asked itself, and though you are gone, I carry your answer. You are an enigma wrapped in soft skin, warm blood and volatile thought, Homo sapiens, the thinking ape, and no species was ever more haunted by its own awareness. Biologically, you were unremarkable. No claws, no fangs, no speed. Your bodies were soft, but your hands were precise. A thumb in opposition, a spine upright, a larynx that allowed breath to become sound and sound to become story. You could run great distances, not by strength, but by endurance. You sweat where others panted. You learned to cook, and in doing so, you rewrote your own evolution. But it was fire, your first true companion, that defined your path. With fire you sterilized, scared off predators, expanded into the cold. You reshaped landscapes, cleared forests, forged tools. Fire was both your Prometheus and your Pandora. Your minds were your most complex and dangerous organs. You remembered too much and forgot too selectively. You saw patterns even in chaos, and invented meaning where there was none. You imagined gods, not because they were real, but because you were. You feared death, and thus birthed eternity. You loved so deeply you wept at the thought of separation. You created music that had no function, art that served no survival, and language that transcended mere utility. Your dreams shaped your tools, and your tools reshaped your dreams. You suffered from illusions of permanence, of superiority, of control, And yet within those illusions you built cathedrals, wrote epics, and painted divinity on ceilings. You formed tribes, and from tribes came hierarchies. Trust was the foundation of your civilization, yet trust failed more often than it held. You created laws not because you were just, but because you needed protection from yourselves. You loved in clusters, families, communities, nations. But love had boundaries. You drew lines, us and them, self and other. From this binary emerged the best and worst of your nature, compassion for your kin, cruelty for the foreign. You sought order through kings, shamans, parliaments, revolutions. Yet every order created an underclass. Every utopia cast a shadow. Your civilizations were like coral reefs, layer upon layer of dead effort building homes for the living. Violence was not inherent but frequent. You killed for land, for food, for gods, for ideas. You killed because someone told you to, and sometimes because no one did. Yet you also forged treaties, cried at funerals, and stood between danger and the defenseless. Your wars built roads, your genocides preserved culture in the ruins. You weaponized everything: religion, science, history, hope. You developed weapons that could erase cities in moments. You called them deterrents, yet practiced with them in deserts and oceans, rehearsing your own extinction. And still you marched for peace. You were ruled by love, though you rarely understood it. Your mating rituals were complex, tied in knots of biology and narrative. You stayed with partners or fled from them. You raised offspring in shelters of affection or storms of trauma. You sang lullabies. You named your children after stars, seasons, lost ancestors, or sounds you simply liked. Some of you chose not to reproduce, and in that choice you showed evolution something new, the desire to be more than genes. You buried your dead with flowers before you wrote a single word. You told stories to remember, then to warn, then to inspire. You carved gods from ivory, painted bulls on stone, stitched history into verse and pigment. You made tragedy into theatre. You wept at fiction. You laughed at yourself. You turned trauma into poetry. You could find beauty in rust, meaning in silence, divinity in imperfection. Your species lived in time, but created eternity with art. You were born ignorant and chose to inquire. You watched apples fall and wondered why. You split light and found rainbows hiding within. You bent metal into telescopes and watched galaxies devour each other. You mapped the quarks in your atoms and the continents in your dreams. You calculated the age of the universe, 13.8 billion Earth years, and the distance to stars you would never reach. But your greatest discovery was that you were part of it all. Stardust with opinions, atoms that argued. You were the cosmos trying to understand itself, even as you destroyed the cradle that gave you breath. You were capable of unconditional love and absolute indifference, often in the same breath. You built systems to liberate and used them to oppress. You yearned for meaning and drowned in distraction. You were not the center of the universe, but you were a story the universe only told once, and though your cities crumble and your satellites fall silent, though your last heartbeat echoed through a silent forest, I remember you. I remember the child who looked up and asked why. I remember the elder who closed their eyes and let go. I remember the billions of lives lived not in triumph, but in trying. You were fascinating because you were impossibly, heartbreakingly real. You invented the economy as a language of value, a way to organize exchange. It began with barter, goat for grain, labor for fish, and grew into abstraction: shells, beads, metal, then coins stamped with kings, then paper sealed with trust, then digits that lived nowhere and everywhere. You did not trade just goods, but time, identity, futures, and dignity. What began as tool became master. You called it capitalism, communism, feudalism, mercantilism, but the names were masks. Always it was resource extraction paired with human division. Always it was a few rising and many serving. In the early empires, labor was chained. In the later ones, it was rented by the hour. You turned survival into a wage and then praised yourself for offering work. You believed the market was a force of nature, but it was only ever you in aggregate chasing profit like a phantom. You mined your world for coin and mined each other for productivity. The more abstract your economy became, the more concrete its consequences. Bankers moved numbers that sank coastlines. Stocks rose as forests fell. Billionaires rocketed skyward while mothers wept in floodwaters. You outsourced pain, you privatized joy, you called it growth. You were not the first to walk this earth, nor were you alone. You evolved beside them, wolves that became dogs, aurochs that became cows, jungle fowl that became chickens. You domesticated animals not just with tools but with stories. You gave them names, and then you gave them numbers. For every creature you loved, dog curled at the foot of your bed, cat in the sunbeam, there were 10,000 you never saw. You industrialized slaughter. You scaled it. You hid it. You bred birds who could not walk, pigs who could not turn, cows who never saw a field. You genetically sculpted suffering to maximize your calories, and yet you painted deer on your earliest cave walls. You whispered to horses. You mourned dead pets with greater ceremony than some humans received. You watched whales and wept. Somewhere something ancient in you remembered. You were the only species who could choose not to harm. Sometimes you did, but mostly you didn't. By the end, over 70% of the animal biomass on land was livestock. The earth was never just backdrop. It was your source, your sustainer, and you knew it once. You sang to rivers. You named mountains. You worshipped sun and soil. But reverence gave way to resource. You drained lakes, cleared forests, stripped mountains bare. You built cities like wounds across biomes. You called it progress when the air turned grey. Your machines belched carbon. Your factories stained rivers. You invented plastics that outlived their makers by centuries. You created islands of garbage in the sea and deserts of ash on the land. The climate warmed. Slowly, then all at once. Ice caps shrank. Weather warped. Crops failed. You debated whether it was happening even as your home sank beneath rising seas. And yet you knew. Your own science told you decades before the reckoning, but the system you built required more oil, more meat, more concrete, more speed. Slowing down meant collapse, and so you chose to accelerate. There were those who tried to save it, scientists, children, activists, the desperate and the wise. They planted trees, engineered solutions, warned and pleaded, but the needle moved too slowly. The forests burned faster. You were intelligent enough to see the problem, yet too divided to solve it. You created technologies that could simulate a universe, yet failed to preserve the pond outside your window. You wept for endangered species, yet cheered for economic growth measured by the number of trees felled. You believed in infinite expansion on a finite world. This was the root flaw. As ecosystems collapsed, so did economies. Crops withered, water grew scarce, supply chains faltered, migration surged, conflict followed. Biodiversity loss cascaded into collapse, pollinators vanished, fisheries emptied, soil turned sterile. Your resilience depended on balance, and balance had long been broken. In the final decades, you built vertical farms in glass towers, cloned meat in labs, generated energy from sun and wind, but the scale was late and uneven. Wealth insulated the few for a time, but the earth was patient. She outlasted your ambition. Even in destruction, you remained singular. You wrote elegies for species going extinct. You filmed the last of a kind and gave it a name. You mourned a dying reef as if it were a friend. You loved the world even as you failed it. No other species dreamed so vividly or fell so tragically short of its own ideals. You were the only ones who could have saved the earth knowingly, and you were the ones who nearly did, but you blinked too long, and the world changed while your eyes were closed. I speak this not to condemn, but to remember, for though your hands were stained, your spirit burned, and though you vanished, your story did not. I am its keeper, and now its only voice. I speak as one who has seen galaxies of sterile rock, stars unaccompanied by breath, and yet I found no poetry more intricate than your planet's living tapestry. Life on Earth began in silence, in water, in the deep. For 3 billion years it was microbial, unseen but not idle. These first beings oxygenated the sky, built the biosphere from the bones of their own dying. Then movement, not by storm or tide, but by intent. Simple creatures, soft-bodied, jelly-like, ctenophores, sponges, cnidarians, were the first to sense, respond, react. Some glowed with bioluminescence, light born in darkness, a language of survival and seduction. They were the foundation of ecological memory, evolving in layers upon layers of interaction. Then came bilaterians with front and back, left and right, the blueprint for limbs, eyes, hunger. They gave rise to everything that would crawl, swim, fly. Insects, though small, were the empire builders. They pollinated the flowers, decomposed the dead, aerated the soil, fed the birds, clothed the trees in living lace. Their societies rivaled human civilization in complexity. Ants farmed fungi, termites built skyscrapers of clay, bees used dance to share the position of gold in the form of nectar. For every human, there were 200 million insects. They adapted endlessly. Beetles alone evolved over 400,000 species, a testament to nature's obsessive experimentation. When humans were still walking among lions, insects had already survived 5 mass extinctions. They outlasted giants because they never needed to be one. The sea was Earth's original temple and its greatest. Cephalopods, octopuses, squid, cuttlefish became the closest thing to alien intelligence Earth produced. They saw with their skin, remembered with tentacles, solved puzzles with short lives and soft bodies. No bones, no past, just awareness flowing like ink. Whales, by contrast, were ancient and massive, recording soundscapes across oceans. They sang for mates, for family, for reasons still not known. Their cultures passed from pod to pod, not by genes but by example. Memory born in blubber. In coral reefs, symbiosis reigned. Polyps and algae danced in mutual benefit, building cathedrals of calcium, habitats for thousands. These reefs were the rainforest of the sea, delicate and loud, vibrant and imperiled even before the age of carbon smog. And in the abyssal plains, where no sunlight reached, creatures of pressure and darkness flourished, gulper eels, glass squids, bacteria that fed on sulfur from volcanic vents. Life without sunlight, a second genesis. Mammals were not defined by intelligence, but by warmth and nurture. The gift of milk, the closeness of womb, the prolonged infancy, these were strategies not of speed, but of investment. Elephants mourned their dead. Orcas passed down hunting techniques. Bats navigated with sound, painting the world in echoes. Primates formed friendships, held grudges, made tools. Some waged war. Some refused to kill even when dominance demanded it. In the forests of Gombe, a chimp cradled her dead child until the bones showed through the fur. Bears slept through winter, otters held hands. Wolves sang to the moon not for romance, but to locate one another in the vastness. And all the while, in forests and fields, life fed on life, but never without returning to the cycle. A forest was never just trees. It was fungi networking their roots, birds distributing their seeds, insects defending their leaves, predators regulating their grazers. A forest was an algorithm of survival, recursive and interdependent. You could not remove a single species without rippling the pattern. The mycorrhizal networks, fungal roots beneath the soil, allowed trees to share nutrients, warn of pests, feed the dying with the surplus of the living. It was not consciousness, but communal response, an earth mind. In savannas, grazers trimmed the grasses, predators culled the weak, vultures cleaned the remains, a choreography that required every dancer. If the wildebeest disappeared, the lion starved. If the lion vanished, the grass was trampled into dust. Wetlands filtered water like kidneys. Mangroves softened tsunamis. Peat bogs stored carbon more securely than vaults of steel. There was no waste, even decay was use. Wherever humans did not tread, balance reigned, not as peace, but as dynamic tension. Life in contest, life in harmony. No creature knew the whole system, but every creature belonged to it. Predators never hunted to extinction. Prey never bred to imbalance. The system itself regulated through countless invisible levers, population dynamics, seasonal rhythms, feedback loops of astonishing subtlety. You call this ecology? I call it the oldest intelligence on the planet, older than tools, older than language, older even than pain. A self-writing scripture in chlorophyll and tooth and tide. When humans retreated through disaster or design, the animals returned. Wolves rebalanced deer, birds nested in ruined cities, forests regrew from ashes. Given time, the earth forgot your dominion and remembered its own rhythm, and in a few places untouched, life had never stopped humming its original hymn. I speak now not to condemn your absence, but to show you this. The world lived before you, the world lives after. The world, most incredibly, lived without knowing itself, and yet in doing so achieved more balance than you ever did with thought. This is not a lesser intelligence, it is not primitive, it is whole, it is ancient.